Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. James Baldwin.
The way that our religion works is that you give an offering to the ancestors for an outcome that you want. But it's not that you want to win the beauty pageant or want the new job and you give an offering. I mean, that you don't really call the ancestors for things like that. You're invoking the protection of the ancestors for life and death situations. And certainly we felt that the ICE situation in Minnesota was a life and death situation for the Hmong people, for many people, and for us. So my mother did a ceremony where we sacrificed a pig and several chickens to make ourselves invisible from ICE. And we did something similar during COVID. Whether you believe it's true or not, I certainly believe it's truth. It's part of my faith. And so I did feel a little better after we did the ceremony to know that, the ancestors were protecting me and watching over me.
Vang was born in Laos and raised in Minnesota, in a world shaped by memory, migration, and the quiet weight of what is carried across generations. As a Hmong-American writer and journalist, she exposes her culture and her experiences so that they may be seen. It is telling, then, that the current situation in Minnesota finds her hoping to become invisible, at least to those sowing hatred and chaos in the streets. I'm Christopher Wurst, and this is
Soft
power.
Powerful.
Soft
Power.
Powerful stories.
Powerful.
Soft.
Powerful. Stories.
For those that are not aware of who the Hmong people are, we are an indigenous group to China. In fact, the majority of Hmong people that are living right now are living in rural areas in southern China. And so how the Hmong people came to be in the United States is really a story about war and resilience. After being conquered by the Han Chinese, really the Hmong people were living without their own language, living without their own leaders, living without a culture. And so they started moving south. And so the Hmong people found themselves living at the very highest part of mountains in southern China and Southeast Asia, slowly moving south. Well, they find themselves in Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia, actually, when the French arrive. Then they find themselves then subjugated by the French. In fact, some Hmongs, unable to pay the taxes that the French had given them, resorted to suicide by eating opium or resorted to even selling their own children. The French leave, and then the Americans quickly came. And so the Americans are in Southeast Asia and now waging the Vietnam War. But at the same time as the Vietnam War is happening, there's actually a clandestine war that's happening in Laos called the Secret War. And this war was actually run by the CIA. And so what the CIA did was they recruited hill tribes, the Hmong people, to fight the communist Lao, called the Pathet Laos, in the Viet Congs. And so the Hmong people were instrumental in doing two things. One was that they would actually disrupt the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The strategy of the CIA is like blowing up the Autobahn so that Hitler doesn't transport resources, whether that be people or bullets. And then the second thing they did was to actually rescue American pilots that had been imprisoned. And so they did those two really important things. And we know what happened in Vietnam. The United States decided to withdraw from Vietnam. It was a very unpopular war domestically in the United States. And right after they withdrew from Vietnam, they withdrew from Cambodia. They also had a presence there, and also Laos, where the Hmong people were at. So at that moment, the Laotian government targeted Hmong for annihilation. And so we had, mass extermination of Hmong people who were killed at that moment. And those that could get away, like my parents, fled to Thailand, where they lived in refugee camps before the United States was able to bring them. That's actually how the Hmong people came to the United States. How the Hmong people came to states like Minnesota and Wisconsin in the Midwest is really because of the strong faith communities that live in those states. So In Minnesota, you had organizations like Catholic Charities and Lutheran Social Service, along with those churches that decided, because of compassion and humanitarian reasons, to sponsor Hmong people into these communities. And now Minnesota has the largest urban Hmong population. And in fact, the Twin Cities is known as like the Hmong intellectual and Hmong cultural capital, the Hmong people all over the world. And we see that because we have the first Hmong mayor in the city of St. Paul. The city of St. Paul is the capital of Minnesota. And we also have Hmong people who, own multi-million-dollar businesses. We have Hmong people who are college professors and artists. I would say that there's a real strong Hmong middle class that is in the Twin Cities. And when you have enough critical mass of middle class people, then you could, start engaging in civics, politics, and commerce, and in the arts. Because if you're not thinking about where your next meal is, you can actually think about art. I think I was always born with a little sadness and just this understanding that violence exists. Even if I didn't consciously understand it, I felt like it was integrated into my spirit somehow. That's because I was born in 1975 on April 28th. That month is actually important because that's actually the month that the United States pulled out of Laos. And just a few weeks earlier, it had pulled out of Vietnam and Cambodia. And so my mom, was a very young person. She was 19 years old, and I was the first child. I come from a relatively well-to-do family, but that distinction doesn't mean anything when everybody's running for your lives. We had gotten word that the Americans were leaving Southeast Asia, and they would only take their true allies. So my dad, because of his position as a major in the CIA Army and also as an assistant to General Vang, who is known as the Hmong George Washington. So my dad already had left Laos to the safety of Thailand, and then sent word to my mom that it's done and that she should just run for her life. He had told my mom that there was going to be 3 secret planes at the airport because I was born in a CIA military base, and that military base had CIA planes that were there. That there was going to be 3 planes that were going to be taking off, and my mom should be on one of those planes. Well, my mother, she just had a baby, but she's also a very strong, spirited 19-year-old. She gets to the base, and there's like thousands of people trying to get on 3 planes. And in her effort to get on the planes with me and on her back, she was carrying me with a baby carrier on the back. She actually got trampled by thousands of feet, people who are just as desperate as her. And she was then rescued by one of our uncles who pulled her up from the feet of thousands of people that was crushing myself and her. He pulls her up and he helps usher her to one of the planes. And I don't know much about military airplanes, but it's one of those airplanes where the hatch is in the back and it opens and closes and you can drive up military vehicles to the back. Well, it's actually closing. And the uncle actually, with his last strength, throws my mom into the closing hatch. And my mother said that there was total confusion. The rest of the Hmong people had to go through the jungle being chased by the communist Laos and the Viet Congs and swim across the Mekong River to the safety of Thailand, where they stayed at refugee camps. And my mother was reunited with my father at one of those camps called Ban Vinai. She had 2 more children in the refugee camp, so 3 in total. And then the 3 of us, my 2 siblings and I, we came with my parents first to Illinois, where my mother cleaned hotel rooms and to survive. And my dad, because of his language skills, was able to get a job at a refugee resettlement organization. The way that the Hmong community and Hmong clan system works is that you follow the clan's member who are successful, and you rely on them. There's no social service organizations historically in the Hmong community, so you rely on those of your relatives who are wealthy and who supposedly know more. And so because the Hmong people were doing so well in Minnesota, other Hmong people came. So this is 1983, and my father had learned that Minnesota was just very kind to immigrants and refugees. And they had a reputation for really strong schools and people of faith, and people of moral quality, and that was really the place to be. And that Hmong people were starting to settle in Minnesota. And so that drew my parents. The Hmong people and our distinct identity as Hmong is because we have clung to those traditions and customs and to each other. And so whether the Hmong people were living under Han Chinese rule or living in Laos, we all were together and we had this cohesive Hmong identity. And that was fine. No one challenged or questioned that, as far as I know. But when we arrived here in Minnesota, it was just like end game, because the Western identity or the American identity asks you to give up some part of yourself in order to fit in. So there was a lot of pressure from my parents and my extended family, and then our clan, and then the larger community, to still hold on to these things that make us Hmong, like our language, like going to the Hmong New Year. That's one of our customs. And then also dating and marrying Hmong people. That's how we have survived. My parents, they're figuring out how to raise their children, and their children are being lured or mesmerized by this like Western culture that's like this shiny, glowy thing that offers so much. And yet at the same time, they do want their children to be successful and to fit in, to go to school, but at the same time, they have to hold on to pieces of themselves that's Hmong, that makes us uniquely Hmong. The two most popular Hmong religion is Hmong Christianity, and then Hmong shamanist animism, Buddhism, where you worship your ancestors. And the animism is that you believe that everything has a soul. So I see the plant behind you, that plant would have a soul. I see the trees outside and the trees have a soul. So that's the animist part. If people know anything about indigenous religion, especially indigenous religion in the United States, is very similar to that belief. And so my mother is a shaman in that faith. And you don't go to school to be a shaman. You're chosen to be a shaman. You either are or you aren't, You either have a calling or you don't. And there's actually a phrase called when the spirit catches you and you fall down. And that's a process of when you're about to be a shaman, your spirit, you encounter a physical or a mental challenge in your life. And so you're falling down. And then the spirit catches you. The spirit lifts you up. And that's because you needed to go through that spiritual or that physical challenge in order to be a Hmong shaman. And so my mom had the calling, and you have the calling since you're a child. Once you have the calling, you cannot deny that calling. If you do, then you face great challenges, because the idea is that you have the calling, you answer it. And so my mom had the calling and she became a shaman. Growing up in the Twin Cities, I always felt like my foot was firmly planted in two cultures, the Hmong culture and the Midwest American culture. And then I had two tongues. I had the Hmong tongue. I spoke Hmong at home. And then I had the American English tongue, and I spoke English outside of the house. And there was a lot of conflict. There was a lot of confusion at various times. I think I went through the various stages of adaptation where I hated the American culture because it represented everything that my culture didn't, And then I went through the next stage, which is that I hated my Hmong culture and I tried not to be Hmong. And then somewhere along the way, I think maybe in my late 20s, early 30s, it took me a really long time to really reconcile that I was both those two things. That I was both Hmong and I was both American. There was a lot of growing pains. I mean, there was times when I just didn't understand why I just couldn't go and see a movie with my friends. But the way that Hmong women and girls are perceived is that you stay home and you're dutiful and you cook and you clean. And you didn't go and do sports and you didn't go and see movies with boys because that would be dishonorable and you would tarnish your reputation because God knows like what would happen to women the moment they left the house. They could totally go mad with, with hysteria, or other men could take advantage of them because of their naivety. And then there was also some stuff about the Western culture that I did not like at all. I didn't like the fact that there was no reverence in the elders. In my teens, I recognized it as being very youth-orientated. For a long time, I really felt that I was just like a feather, just floating between the two cultures. And then I realized that no one was going to rescue me, and that it was up to me to try to figure this out, and that there are thousands of Hmong people that were men and women that were going through the same experiences I was too. So my mom and I actually were in high school at the same time. She attended a night school at Central High School. She felt like it was really important to get a high school diploma if she wanted more opportunities in the future. So even she had like a recognition of what she wanted to do with her life. I'm the oldest, and in our family are 8 children. So she was still having children as she was in high school with me. And I would help her as the oldest daughter and being very dutiful, take care of the kids. So we would actually take turns watching the children and then typing or working on our essays together. And we would actually switch off, And sometimes when it was just too much and I actually would cry, because, everybody had a computer, but I didn't. I still had the old little typewriter, and she would just say, "Here, let me type for you," because she wanted me to be successful.
I'm just curious about the word community and what community meant to you as you were kind of hitting adulthood.
That word is really complicated for me, even though I say it loosely and freely now. The word of community has really changed depending on where I was in my life. But you're asking me about a specific time in my life when I came to adulthood. And during the 90s, that would be the time when I really came, of age, and I was in college and a young professional. It was a time when I think the Hmong people were really struggling because they had been in the United States in 1975. So about 20-ish years. And now the Hmong people actually have been in the United States for 50 years. In fact, 2025 was the 50th anniversary of the Hmong people in the United States. So I think the 90s and early 2000s was a critical point to most Hmong families and the Hmong community to decide how it was going to be, if we're going to stay in the United States or go back. And generally speaking, like what was going to be the American things that we're adopting, and what were going to be the things in the Hmong community or the customs and traditions in the Hmong community that we're keeping. Because I came as a young person, having lived the first 5 years in a refugee camp, and I came here when I was 5, I feel like I was growing up as the Hmong community was growing up too in the United States, and we were coming of age together and making these hard decisions of what is the best of the Hmong culture that we want to keep, that makes us uniquely, distinctly Hmong, and not Chinese or not Laotian or not Vietnamese. And then what are the best parts of the United States with its customs, cultures, and traditions that we can take on. And being a Hmong woman, I have to say that I decided that I was going to be an individual woman, and that I was going to have a college education and not get married young. It was really a struggle to not get married young because so many women of my generation got married when they were like 15 or 16. That was very common because we had just gone through 100 plus years of colonialism and war. And when you're in that constant fight or flight stage, you're just getting married young because life expectancy is not long. But that didn't translate well to the United States. And so I made a concerted effort. I just remember thinking if I could just wait until I'm 19 to get married, it would be like a victory. But I waited until I was 24. So I wanted to have an education. And I think as I was having that realization, I think a lot of Hmong elders were going through a similar process, but maybe from their own experience saying and thinking that Hmong women deserve an education and Hmong women should have the opportunity to have other roles outside the family besides, just being a wife and a mother. I really don't know what was the cause of my success. I don't know why I made it, because certainly there were women who are just as young girls, really bright, really smart, really studious students who, for whatever reason, got married really young and never had an opportunity to have an education beyond high school or to have that experience of like seeing the world, which is I think a really Western concept. And certainly there was some girls I grew up with who were in gangs that I actually was associated with too, who were killed because of their gang activity. And then there were people who just like fell. I just was talking this weekend with one of my really good friends, and she fell into drugs and is now unsheltered. And my mother ran into her recently, and she gave my mother a sweater even though she was unsheltered, and my mom accepted it, because yes, because what was she gonna say? You're unsheltered, like you need the jacket more than I do. And so there are so many people who didn't make it. And I don't know what qualities distinguish myself from other people. I would say that I was very curious about the world and about life, and that curiosity drove me to learn more, to read. For one thing, so I was like a really avid reader. I really liked history, so I studied history a lot because it was one of the only things that my parents would tolerate me doing was reading and learning about history that they thought was pretty passive. I mean, I was just sitting there reading history books. And then I actually wanted to be a storyteller. And the Hmong people were known for our stories. In fact, the Hmong language is called the language of the flower because when you listen to the Hmong language, it's like visually watching a flower open up. So we have a long tradition of storytelling, and I wanted to be a storyteller for the Hmong people. No one told me that, or nor even though now I write a column for the Minnesota Star Tribune, and I've written some stories. No one has said, "You're the Hmong storyteller." This is a title I gave myself. I just want to say that, but I really wanted to tell Hmong stories. And so I think that desire to tell stories is what really propelled me forward.
I did want to talk about ICE. How has that affected you personally?
I have had all these unresolved trauma and fear emerge. It's like it was under the surface and I thought I had dealt with it, but I didn't. So I've had restless nights, anxiety, trauma. I'll just give you an example. For so many weeks during the ice surge, I couldn't sleep at night. I'd wake up in the middle of the night screaming and crying in a pool of sweat, thinking that I'm going to be separated from my children. That gave me a better understanding of my parents' experience. But also, it was a reminder that I really truly wasn't an American because ICE was targeting certain people of certain skin color. I say that, but I also want to say that though they were targeting ethnic looking people, they had no regard for anybody's life or well-being, whether you're white or belong to an ethnic group that was like black and brown and yellow. And so they were like arresting indigenous people. They're arresting Asian people. They dragged a man in his underwear out in East St. Paul with nothing more than his granddaughter's blanket over him and underwear and Crocs in the middle of below zero weather, even though this Hmong person is a citizen of the United States. But I just had a lot of trauma because it brought to the surface this whole idea of whether I'm really an American or not. During World War II, a significant number, I think 200,000 Japanese Americans were interned. They were basically put in our version of concentration camps in the middle of the desert because they look like the enemy. I didn't know this, but a few years ago, I actually was, my husband and I decided to visit the Southwest. So I didn't know at the time until I was there, but we rented an RV, drove all over the Southwest, and we came upon this boondocking site. And it looked really flat, really nice. And we were there for, almost a week, and we decided to just explore the area. The whole week that I was there, I just heard screams and cries. I felt like the wind was carrying sadness and pain and suffering. And I felt really uneasy. But sometimes it's really hard to explain that to somebody who doesn't, my husband, who doesn't live in that realm. As we were exploring, there was this like old fence and there was a plaque. And it said that it was actually a former internment camp. I started crying, and I understood that I was really hearing the cries of all the souls, the spirits of the people that were lost in that space. I try not to let my children see me crying because I know that it's disarming and confusing for children to see their parents crying. So I was like trying to wipe the tears away. But it really got to me that those Japanese Americans lost their homes, their farms, their livelihoods, lost everything. And the only thing that was acknowledged was this little plaque that was in the middle of the desert. I bring that up because you are an American until you're not an American. And politics change really quickly. And I was in a moment where Donald Trump and his administration were telling people like me that I wasn't an American, even though I'm a citizen and was raised here, and telling my father that he wasn't an American, even though he fought for the United States government and was willing to give his life over to the red, white, and blue, and Star Spangled Banner, and amber waves of grain. And he was willing to die for the United States. He's a citizen, but that didn't matter because like that old man, Hmong man that was dragged out in his underwear, they would drag my father out too. And then my children, I have 3 children and 2 of them don't look like me. One of them does look like me. So that means that he presents as very Asian. They would take my child like they took Liam Ramos and use him as bait to hurt our family because they've done that before, and then ship him off to basically an internment camp where little Liam fell into depression. And if folks don't know who Liam is, he was known, and seen worldwide for having the Pikachu hat, the blue hat, and was used by ICE officers to try to get his mother to open the door after his father was detained. And so I'm seeing these images and these stories that are not far from my house, that are in my community, of where the United States government doesn't respect or consider, my history of the United States. Yes, I was waking up in the middle of the night screaming because I had separation anxiety from my children. I actually walked around with a whistle. I had all sorts of things in my car to be prepared to be stopped by ICE.
I think that the administration misjudged this when it came to where they chose to do this giant operation. I don't know if you agree with that, but do you have observations about the way that the community has responded?
I agree with you that the administration misjudged where they wanted to do this type of operation. I saw it as a pilot project. In administrative term, is that they were going to pilot a new way of detaining and deporting people. And instead of doing it along the border states, or instead of doing it at a place where there is actually statistically a lot of people who are really what Christy Gnomes calls the worst of the worst, or people who are illegal immigrants, or people who did not have their papers to work at. The Minnesota doesn't have those people. I mean, we have proven with research that those people, though they exist in Minnesota, not by a critical number. And so they really, not only do they statistically choose the wrong place where they can actually, I don't know if they did the numbers, like if they ran the numbers, because if you're looking for a certain type of people, you have to run the numbers to make sure they're in the community. And so my thought is that no one ran the numbers, and they had to get like quotas, and they just started taking whoever they could in the community. So that's like the numbers piece. But in terms of the identity and the spirit, they really must judge Midwesterners. They really must judge people who are from Minnesota. Just the tenacity and the love and the care that exists in our community. People that I know that are in my circle that you would say are European Americans or white. I mean, I know one person who was taking a family to work and driving them to work every day. The people that they were driving, that this person was driving to work, would actually be covered up in a blanket just to take them to work. And this is a white woman that lives in South Minneapolis, and she was taking some neighbors to work. And I had another person that I know who's a white man, and I asked him, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I'm not doing like what other people are doing. I'm not doing this and this." He's like, "I'm just helping one family." He's like, he said, "My neighbors and I decided to adopt this one family, and we're just sending them food and we're keeping them safe." And I said to him, That's actually how Anne Frank was saved. Not a lot of people knew about her father and her family. I mean, her father and then the family. So only a few people knew, and they're helping. And that's how there's. He's like, oh, I never thought about that, because he felt bad that he was only helping one family, but he was helping them in secret. And so I was just reminding him, like, we do what we can, and that's actually the Anne Frank story. So I just knew so many people who were doing what they can, driving people, having food drive, taking care of families, guarding daycares. I had another person I knew that told me that he's on a Signal group chat, and then when the message is sent, then he and a bunch of dads. This person's like 6'3", white man, and he and the dads go and guard the daycare, at the school, and that's what they had to do. So everybody was doing like their part. Everybody wanted to be engaged. I think that what has happened during Operation Metro Surge has been devastating, not only economically to our state, but devastating to this whole generation of people who have to who've experienced the trauma and then carry on to the next generation. And I don't know if the government is ever going to be in a position to acknowledge that, or to recognize it, or to compensate for it too. I do know people, kids and elders, who are still afraid to, go outside, who are still afraid to go to the store, who don't believe that this is over yet. When you're a person of color, you are told that your identity and your life is not worth that of a white person. That's the reason why there's a Black Lives Matter movement. And it was really just so odd to see that during this ICE surge, there was like no respect for life at all, even the life of white people who we were told matters more than ours. So that was just shocking. Even though physically those ICE agents are gone, their shadows and are imprinted in the memory and the psyche of the people who are there. And I think it's going to take a generation or two for Minnesotans, whether you're white or whether you're a person of color, to come out of this. I just have so much pride being Hmong and being a Hmong-American. I would say the values that are the cornerstone of my life right now, and what I'm hoping to pass on to my children, is really just the love and the strength and family. I think that the Hmong people have survived through great adversities, whether that be geopolitics to the crops not growing, and now the whole village is starving, because families take care of each other, and we love each other, and that's something that I'm trying to impart on my children. The other value that I hold dear is really this value of resiliency, and that's what I'm trying to teach my children, is that you can be resilient, and things are not going to go your way all the time. I'm just so happy that what they're experiencing is that I didn't get the volleyball position I wanted. And that's what they have to be resilient. And it's not that, people are chasing me through the jungle and trying to kill me.
When you look at the world through your children's eyes, what gives you hope? What makes you hopeful?
You're catching me in a moment where I have 2 teenagers and 1 tweener. And right now, I feel like I can't look through their eyes, because according to them, I know nothing about their experience or what they're going through or their heartache. But I hope, because they're mixed race, that they're in a world where they really are tomorrow. I tried to say to them, look at Obama, he's mixed race. And I do think that, this world is shrinking, and people are connecting in different ways, and that's through relationships too. I tell them about John Wick, Keanu Reeves, and how he's half Asian, half white. I mean, there's all these people that I point to, so that they feel that there's people that look like them that are successful. And I feel like they do represent our future. And even in Minnesota, that Minnesota is really changing. The demographics of our state is changing, and that they are really representing the tomorrow. I feel also very hopeful for them, of the world that they're inheriting. Like Martin Luther King said, the arc of history is long but always bends towards justice, is what he said, or I'm paraphrasing it. they're inheriting something, a world that is bending towards like more equality.
Vang is a Hmong-American writer born in Laos and raised in Minnesota. Her work moves between memory and migration, exploring belonging, inheritance, and the quiet negotiations of citizenship. She is the author of Shoua and Northern Lights Dragon, and numerous essays and stories featured in anthologies and literary publications. Currently, she's a contributing columnist for the Minnesota Star Tribune. She lives in Minnesota. To learn more about this program, including guest backgrounds, photographs, and a chance to leave feedback, visit softpowerfulstories.org. I'm Christopher Wurst, the host and producer of Soft Powerful Stories. Thanks for listening.